welcome to Cultural Quarter of an Hour podcast, a podcast where we celebrate the culture of Stoke-on-Trent and North Staffordshire. And remember, culture, it is so much more than stuffy paintings in a stuffy art gallery. It is so much more than a posh orchestra playing to posh people in posh ball gowns and suits. The culture we're talking about is the culture of every day, the culture of our city, our area that surrounds the city. It is the people, it is the buildings on our streets, it is the canals we enjoy, it is the heritage that is actually part of our everyday life, our present and our future. So grab a brew, peel your ears back and enjoy. Welcome to this week's Cultural Quarter of an Hour. Hope you are well. This week I have come to Burslem to go on a special tour exploring Arthur Berry.
There were changes in society with the housing boom, etc. And little things that meant so much to Arthur had begun to change. So, for example, the old wooden rollers, you know, the mangle rollers, they were beginning to disappear just about by the 1950s.
Well, it's historian Mervyn Edwards who is leading the tour, and I've been having a chat with him about how he thinks this evening went.
I was absolutely delighted. The last time we did this was on a Monday morning. We got, I think, 40 odd then. So we just wanted to do this with a different audience tonight. And as I joked at the beginning, a rather more classy one, but I'm sure people will forgive me for that.
What do you think people think about Arthur Berry before they come on the tour?
I think some people may be open-minded if they've not seen too much of the artwork and they want to have a look at what he is about. He is somebody who inspires a great deal of curiosity, and his artwork, to many, the mindset is possibly Marmite. You'll either really like what Arthur does or you will not. But the great thing is, if you don't like the artwork, there's something else with Arthur to amuse. So on the talk earlier on, I did say a lot of his work, his output was punctuated by various bits of daft, he said, and I like that. Who wants perfection? He didn't do perfection. And besides of which, it's bad for your mental health, as I suspect he realised.
I was going to say, you mentioned a lot that he wasn't someone who was consistently high up there, bang on the mark every single time he did something. He did stuff because he wanted to do it.
He was prolific and it churned out of him. We can all be picky with what we do as creative people. In fact, I've been told off about it before now. I think Arthur got it just right. He did produce. He did scratch over old paintings that perhaps he wasn't too pleased with. But I think with Arthur, the main thrust was getting on and doing something else as well and creating. And creativity, therefore, was his raison d'etre.
So this is a man who was around in most people who's here's lifetime. What do you think? What is your memory of him?
My own personal memories. With me, it would have to be because he, like me, loved public houses. Of course, he's waxed rhapsodic on these many, many times before. He used to frequent a pub called the Plough in Wolstanton, which I remember doing similarly when I was a very younger man. And he would often play court to a coterie of, they were probably art students and various friends. And you could tell that he was enjoying himself. But again, the interest of Arthur Berry is that he, I think, was fairly insular until he got to know you. So I never quite plucked up the courage to go over and talk with him because I think there was a sort of invisible shield there and I wanted to respect his privacy.
How much do you regret that?
Well, the only time I did venture up to him is a friend of mine wanted his autograph on one of his books for her birthday, and so I did go over to Arthur and I said, "Mr. Berry, can you sign the book for me?" And I passed it to him with the pen, and he looked up at me as if I were a younger gentleman taking the mick somewhat, which of course I wasn't doing. So it's the privacy thing. There was a shield going on, so he gingerly took the book and the pen from me, signed it and gave it back without a word.
What would you say is your favourite part of the tour then this evening?
I would say it was the chance to recite some of the more humorous poems of Arthur. As it may have been evident, I really get off on that because I can do a pseudo-Arthur voice. I love the timbre of the voice, the rhythms of it, and the comedy contained within that poetry. And, you know, laughter is one of the most marvellous sounds in the world. So if you can make an audience laugh, it's partly me, it's mainly Arthur. I'll take that any day of the week.
I bet you will. And you do, this isn't the only thing you do lots of history tours, don't you, around the city. What is it about this city that inspires you?
I think it's where it's come from, what it wants to be, and how the mindset of local people has changed or otherwise. I think the mindset of local people is easily recognisable if you go back 100, 120 years and you read the works of Arnold Bennett, for example. And my goodness, did he not have a wonderful handle on local people. He got them down to a T. Perhaps whether you liked it or not, but I think the thing with Arnold Bennett, he was a truthful writer. He could have buttered up local people. He could have gone out to impress them and to engage them, but I think he wanted to tell the truth, the harshness of the life that he saw in the 5 towns, as he wrote in the novels, at that period. So that's one of the reasons why his last is endured so much as an author.
In 25, 50 years, 60 years, 80 years' time, when different people are on these tours, touring around, who do you think they'll be talking about?
They may well be talking about Arthur Berry because I think his legacy is there, and Arnold Bennett certainly. I've mentioned in the past that I would have liked to have seen Stoke-on-Trent value Arnold Bennett as much as I think Dorchester honours and really soups up Thomas Hardy, who is another one of my favourite writers. So I think that will come with the goodwill of, for example, the Arnold Bennett Society, who are doing a fantastic job, by the way. I think the other thing, I mean, your question was which of the figures will people remember in 100 years' time? The difficulty is, even 20 or 30 years from here is... Please, let's not lose any more of our building stock, the fine buildings that exist. For example, in Burslem, there are so many jewels in Burslem's crown architecturally, so much history breathed through the brickwork of those buildings. Let's be a little bit more attentive to the whole idea of conservation, please.
Thank you very much for talking to me.
My pleasure.
But if you want a style icon who sums up the mentality of Stoke-on-Trent or some of the culture, I don't think you can look any further or see a better example than Arthur Berry. And his work is sustained, as he puts it, by various bits of daft. And it is.
This evening's tour began and finished at Barewall Art Gallery here in Burslem, and I've been speaking to Amanda Bromley, who is the owner of Barewall Art Gallery, along with Kathy Roberts, who is a poet who was also on the tour this evening.
Well, besides it being a artist who we've worked with for the past 7 years, very enjoyably, I just think he represents the potteries in such a unique way. And he is so talented that I just can't really not be involved with him. He's just such a wonderful artist, and it's an absolute honour to have him on the walls of the gallery.
As we were going around this evening, there were lots of people reflecting on their memories of him in Burslem and beyond. What is it about Burslem and Arthur Berry that you think people just have that connection with?
Well, I think even though he was born in Smallthorne, and he spent a lot of time in Burslem, and really he was one of them, and he really got to know the people of this area. but he also kind of expressed them in his painting and his poems, his writing, and his monologues in such a way that it kind of carries way beyond Burslem. It's for me, it's of, it's national importance, and he really is waving a flag for the area. He absolutely loved Burslem, there's no doubt about it.
Does it frustrate you that artists like Arthur Berry don't necessarily get the national recognition you feel they deserve?
Well, I think it's a case of just working at that, really, and it will come, because he is such a, he's got such a lot left for us to work with that it's almost it's just a matter of when.
For me, he's like the Lowry of Stoke-on-Trent, Staffordshire, because he had the same kind of fascination with the working classes and just observing ordinary everyday life, in much the same way that Lowry just painted what he saw around him, factory people in the street. Berry was completely fascinated by the ordinary people, much more so than, say, normal middle-class people. He wasn't so interested in the educated intellectuals. He was really more interested in street life and the misshapen people, the pubs, the ones with, stunted growth and very ugly, a pregnant girl of maybe 14 or 15. Arthur was fascinated by the kind of ordinary backstreet life that he surrounded himself by.
Oh, you were on the tour this evening. What did you make of it?
I really enjoyed the walk. I would have liked a lot more, because I know that Arthur in his youth went to many more pubs, which probably no longer extant, and probably have to walk twice or three times as far. But it did bring back some good memories for me. I do remember him very much so in the Duke William. And I was telling somebody earlier, he used to have a little round table in the corner, and people would say, "There's King Arthur with his round table," because a dozen or so people would cram around listening to his stories, and he'd got opinions on everything, political and apolitical, artistic. He knew people, and he knew a lot of artists too, so he was quite a massive influence over the students in this town.
Mm-hmm. As a poet, what do you make of his poetry?
Well, I'm a bit jealous of it, because it's so amusing for a start. So if he wrote in such an accessible manner, a very relaxed and unself-conscious way, just the way he talked, actually. So maybe that gives you a clue of how he used to sound. So he wasn't striving to be self-consciously poetic, but he was actually, again, just talking about the way he saw life, the poem about chips and things like that.
The noble chip.
Yeah, very accessible and ordinary.
Yeah.
Make a poem about anything.
Yeah.
He could make a poem about anything at all, So as a poet, I think he was really in touch with his observation, his own observations. He was very acute about studying people, listening to them, reflecting on what he saw around him. Very truthful as well.
It's almost social commentary, isn't it? It's not it is creativity, but what I mean is it's social commentary as well, isn't it?
Very much so. I think that's what comes through. Social commentary, even more than you might call it poetry. At one point, I was reminded of James Joyce and Ulysses, and I'm thinking, my God, he's a kind of virtual Ulysses, So sounds a bit mad, but that's the kind of stream of consciousness thing that he was doing all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, his painting as well. You can look across, people like Van Gogh, and he would choose to do a still life of potatoes, and a jug. It's the food of the working classes. For me, he just really captures this area and presents it in a very noble and kind of important way. So. I love his work.
I know.
Yeah.
Some of his work's very tender. Some of it strikes me as, personally, as sort of a little bit dour, and a little bit sort of dark and maybe not so attractive. I might not want to hang it on my wall. And then there are other things that he's painted. I feel they've got a great tenderness. The way he captures the spirit of the person, and maybe when he does the flowers here and the magnolias. There's a real wild beauty in that, and I think he had a great sensitivity when it came to painting.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Cultural Quarter of an Hour. I'll be back, as always, next week. In the meantime, you can get in touch with me in the usual ways. @CQHpod is Twitter handle, and you can find me on Facebook as well, Cultural Quarter of an Hour Podcast.